Hey y'all, thanks so much for joining ClearTech Loop. We've got another amazing session for you today. I'm Joe Peterson. I'm the CIO of Clarify 360 and the Chief Analyst at ClearTech Research. And today I've got with me Mr. Elliott Mattice. Hi, Elliott.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming. In case you're not familiar with Elliott's company, Exprima, Elliott's the founder, and Exprima is an advisory and consulting firm focused on cybersecurity compliance, specifically CMMC, federal procurement risk, and decision realism. Exprima supports public sector programs and contractors navigating this really complex regulatory and operational environment like CMMCs, for example. No day in the park. So
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So as always, we have 3 questions, and I'm going to ask Elliott those 3 questions. First up, Elliott, how do we operationalize AI governance? And in your opinion, who is legally accountable when an AI agent makes an unauthorized decision?
Oh, those are 2 very big questions. I think to start with, how do you operationalize AI governance? It's a big question that I've seen across the industry for easily the last year. I think back to last spring. I was over at the RSA conference, and everybody was talking AI agents are coming. It's going to be wonderful. Look at all the whiz-bang things they're going to do. In this year, it was great. We have them now. What do we do with these things? How do we control them? How do we secure them? And governance is that big topic that comes up all the time. What I noticed in these conversations is we tend to look at AI security and governance using the models and the frameworks and the thought processes that we've had over the decades for very predictable, very finite machines. They are easy to govern. They're easy to predict. They're easy to control because they are, in comparison to the AI-empowered systems and devices that we have out there, they're dumb. Right. We can control the ports and the protocols and the IP addresses, and we can nail down access control lists. But when you think about AI and it uses language and it's non-deterministic, how do you control that is really a big question. So, when I look at it, I see there is a layer of security. As I mentioned, we have a number of companies out there that are building tools to secure AI. They are building guardrails, they're building text filters, they're getting into the commands and the chats to filter out PII and PHI. They're building layers onto identity so that you can treat AI agents like you would treat a human identity. And then above that, at the very top, I see governance, where there are some governance models, frameworks out there. There's the AI UC1, 42001, AI RMF. There's about 5 of them. And those really speak at the process and procedure level. But to me, what's missing in the middle, and I think it's the biggest chunk of all of this, is trust. And when you to go back to governing your standard server, your firewalls, those infrastructure pieces, you can trust what they do because you can see the inputs and you can see the outputs, and it's really just flipping bits one way or another. But when you look at AI, we build it to become a cognitive offload. We empower it with language. We almost, and I want to walk the line here, but anthropomorphize AI. So how do you trust a system that can essentially think for itself? And so this is a long answer to we're not there yet. How do you govern AI? I think is where you have to build that trust layer. So one of the approaches that I'm taking with some of this is to think of how humans interact. How do we trust each other, and what are the mechanisms and processes, the psychological dynamics that we go through using language and using relationships that humans have had for hundreds of thousands of years? And can some of those lessons and language and relational theories be applied to how we interact with AI? And I think there might be something there, and how you bridge between the security layer of the bits and the bytes and the ports and the protocols, and that higher level of the governance with policy and procedure, rulemaking, and what is your organization going to do? What is their risk tolerance, and that. So I see trust as a big gap in how you can govern AI. And I think with that, to parlay into your second question of what happens when AI behaves the ways that we don't want it to, who's responsible?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen this. We've seen this happen just recently with, I'm going to forget the names of the organizations. They probably don't want to be called out again, but, AI that had gone out and deleted databases, removed production code bases, gone off and done things far beyond what it was expected to do and asked to do, and where the controls were put. So who's ultimately responsible for that? It always, in my mind, has to land with a human being. Somebody has to be responsible for what that does. It's acting on behalf of some kind of control or some kind of command. So somebody has implemented that. So when you have an agent that's gone rogue, you can't govern that. You can't align that behavior or the outputs of that behavior with a framework. And what I mean by that is I come from the federal space. As you mentioned in my little intro there, I've spent about 25 years in IT spaces for the federal government, where there are very strict controls and regulations and clauses. Mm-hmm. And when you have something going haywire like that, and you've breached a specific control, there's always somebody that has to be accountable for that. There's a chain of command there. Now, what we're trying to do is offload a lot of this functionality into AI, so humans are not as involved. But there always needs to be a responsible party. I've thought about this over the years too, even going back to the initial days of self-driving cars. And there's this, it's almost the trolley, the trolley ethics, scenario where somebody has programmed a self-driving car, and it sees what's happening in front of it, and there might be a little old lady on the sidewalk carrying some groceries, and a semi truck that it's going to hit, and where do we make the decision? Who's going to be the victim here? Now, that self-driving car makes those decisions, but it is programmed by somebody. There is something behind that built the logic in there. So somebody needs to be held responsible for how the logic was built. What were the criteria that were created that enabled this AI agent to perform the way it did, missed a control that it needed to have, or a guardrail that wasn't implemented properly? Something has to come back to a human being that, has that liability.
Yeah, I can see that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the early days of cloud and how we got to, and you were talking about trust, and I was thinking about, okay, we got to a golden image, mm-hmm. right? And maybe that's the way things are moving towards the super agent. But then I start to think about that super agent, and I start to think about ephemeral agents that they spin up. And
Yeah.
how are we sure that those ephemeral agents are getting the correct permissions, right? I start to think about things like that, it just makes
Yeah.
my head spin a little bit, right? I'm just like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, because, yeah, just because, right? All right, let's move on. That was a great answer, by the way. Thank you.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
it was good. It made me think. So I thought this was funny. I just heard MCP referred to as the confused deputy. How do we prevent agents from executing actions that the user um, should not be allowed to perform?
I think, this one kind of caught me a little bit, and I'll be upfront. I am not an expert on MCP. I know what it is. I know how
None
it
of us
works,
are.
but
It's new.
I think of it as MCP is just another function within the workflow, right? It's just another tool that it calls
Ah,
upon. So if I am a network administrator, then
uh-huh.
in my previous life I did network administration. I
Okay.
have to have my identity has to have access and permissions to do a certain function, to log
Great.
into a switch and be able to turn up and down ports, for example. Now, in this scenario, AI is out there. It's connecting to an MCP server. It's
Mhm.
then using the MCP to reach other resources that it may or may not have that explicit access to. So, I think of it almost like a gateway,
Right.
or a firewall, in that sense of, at that MCP layer, there should be some identity check back to say, has this agent been provided the resources and the credentials to reach Slack or that database or whatever it is. We need to start thinking about treating these identities. I mean, they're non-human identities, and we want to think of them in the perspective of, could this be a person, right? What happens in the
Mhm.
workflow is this is a person.
Mhm.
And then what are we, again, if I go back to the trust, like, how do I trust when I manage a team, I task somebody, go off and do this. How do I trust they're going to do the right thing? And what
Right.
happens if they don't do the right thing? Then there has to be some repercussion to that. We don't have anything of that nature right now. And that's where some of the work that I'm dabbling into in the trust layer of the AI governance piece is to constantly measure trust,
Hmm.
almost like zero trust is on
Okay.
authentication. You're constantly
Yeah.
authenticating, but you're constantly measuring trust. Did you behave in the way that I expected you to, or at least within a prescribed range? And then if you didn't, why was that, and how do we rein you back in? And then I can also have transitive trust measures consistently happening between endpoints. So my agent would have a trust measure of the MCP server, and vice versa. So that MCP server might say, hey, this agent today, I trusted it, did what it's supposed to do, but the next time it did something odd. So now I'm going to lower my trust of that. And now I'm going to watch a little more carefully. Now I'm going to maybe hesitate to give it all of those controls. Much like, I think of, I think I heard this recently. It was like AI it's like has a toddler's brain or an adolescent's brain, right?
Yeah.
It wants to go push the limits all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm a parent, and my kids, they want to push the limits all the time. And so what happens? How do you correct that behavior? Particularly with um, an identity, or AI doesn't have feelings, right? It's not it's not like I can go send it to the corner and think about what
Yeah.
it did
Yeah.
and it'll come back and apologize to me, and like my kids might or something. But so you have to think about, how can I entice AI to behave within certain
Oh,
constructs? And when you do that in a language having way, but there's no humanity, there's no, I need to behave in a certain way because if I don't do this, then I might lose my job. And if I lose my job, then I can't pay for health insurance or something like that. AI doesn't care about any of those criteria. So you have to motivate it and sculpt it and control it in a different method of trust. And that's where I think, if you have these trust measures where it's almost a scorecard, right? And the
yeah.
balance is always sort of tilting one way or another, then every object out there that interacts can then build its trust matrix with each other and can say, well, I'm not going to allow you to do as many of these things because your trust score fell below my threshold. Now you need to perform certain things to bring it back up to regain my trust. And so that's where I see potentially, again, what you're saying with this MCP, where an agent gets more access than it was entitled to. It can do more things
Right.
than it was allowed to do. Well, if we're constantly observing behavior and constantly measuring where it lands in allowed and performed behavior, then I think you can start reining that in. I think you can start building those controls, and you can then feed between that bottom security layer, like I said, of the ports and protocols and ACLs. And you can say, hey, you were supposed to have access to this, but not this. And you went and tried it anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going to, maybe bring you down a couple notches. And then I would report that up to the governance layer to say, this agent is not behaving quite the way that we want. Now we need to structure things differently. So it's all within, to me, the middle sandwich between governance and security is trust. And that's where I think you solve a lot of these problems and these questions.
That's really interesting because when you were talking in the beginning, I was thinking, oh, our thinking is a bit aligned. However, mine is more truncated than yours. I hadn't given it as much thought. And what I mean by that is I've been thinking that old school cybersecurity is black and white and
Yes,
AI is gray, right?
very much. Yes.
Right. It's old school is yes, no binary, and and AI is so gray. And I love your idea of a risk scoring protocol. And then I start thinking about, okay, well, AI doesn't care. And so this is not like one of Pavlov's dogs, because, you know, it doesn't care whether it gets fed or not.
Yeah.
So what's the way to rein it in? How do you make it care?
Well, I think, again, when you start, when you have this trust score matrix,
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily have to care as much about, does it care whether its trust score went up or down. The agent itself should have some awareness that, I did this and then my trust score reduced.
Yeah. Yeah.
But does it then have a feeling of guilt or shame about that? Of course not. But
No.
what it should look at is, if my score drops below a certain threshold, then I won't be able to access this resource based on this rule set. Maybe that MCP server
Right.
says, if your trust score is below 50, just for a number, you can't access this resource. Well, when I perform that action, now my trust score dropped to 45. So I'm not able to access that resource. So if I'm not able to access that resource, then I can't perform my own functions. I can't do what I'm designed to do. I have to have an alternative here. And this is where it gets a little more gray too,
Right.
is we've already seen that. My guardrails kept me from doing a certain thing.
Yep.
So I'm just going to ignore the guardrails.
Right.
That's still the problem to be solved, is we want enough independence and autonomy out of these agents, or else they're frankly fairly useless.
They are.
But with enough autonomy and independence, then it's undefined, unrestrained risk. They can just do whatever they want
Right.
at any time. And again, we've seen it. They've just removed the controls that were there.
Yeah.
So those controls are more of, guardrails, for example, will tell it, if you're given such and such a command, you can't do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think about with this trust matrix is other endpoints, other devices, other pieces of the world that it connects with.
Mm-hmm.
So that MCP server can then tell it, no, I can't. I'm not going to let you do this. So it's not controlling the agent in an only controlling the agent, so that the agent says, here's your rules, go do. All of that is very important. Don't get me wrong. We should always have guardrails. We should always have the agent have specific controls. But I don't feel it's sufficient enough. We need to have all of the other pieces there saying, can I trust you? Can I continue to trust you? Are you acting within my expected boundaries? And again, I relate this to human behavior too. We can ask somebody in our teams, our colleagues, I need you to go write this report. Go make this PowerPoint or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
I can't read your mind. I can't, mind meld with you and tell you exactly the way I want it done. I want a blue banner. I want this size font. I want it over here and all of that stuff. I really could. I could spend hours telling you all of the specifics, but then I don't need you. I'll just do it myself. But if I want to tell you, go do this thing, and you output a report, and it's within a box of expected things, right? It hits the mark. Maybe it's not perfect the way that I would design it, but it does the job. It's sufficient. You have your own experience, your own worldviews, your own, likes and dislikes and designs and all of that stuff. Everything goes into that. That's why we're unique. But as long as it's within that expected range, we're okay. Now, if you come up with something, I asked you to create me a report on firewall rules, and you give me a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, this makes no sense. You've gone way off. That's not okay. That's the kind of human relational piece that I'm talking about. Is we can give AI enough room to be independent, to be autonomous, as long as we hold it accountable for its outputs. To say, you need to output something in this range. And if you go off reservation, you're not trustworthy enough anymore. And we have to rebuild trust. And the way we rebuild trust is through the same mechanisms that we do with human relational theory of, I need to see this changed. I need to see it repeated. So you need to perform in these ways so that I know you're trustworthy to me again. So maybe I'll take away the car keys because you snuck out of the house, but you can still get your hours towards your driver's license training or whatever, as long as I'm in the car, those kinds of things. So there's sort of I hesitate to use the word, but almost a guardrail in that sense.
Yeah,
right? It's different.
It's so interesting when you were talking, because two things came to mind. The first is, what's old is new. This is defense in depth, right?
Yes.
It really is. And the second thing was, gosh, how interesting to think about an MCP server instead of being a bridge, but also maybe as a firewall.
Sure.
So there comes your network design back into play. Once a network engineer, always a network engineer, right?
Right.
But very, very interesting. I mean, this has been such a great conversation. I hope you get VC people, if you're out there, He's got a great idea. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's coming together. You had interviewed my partner Phil Stafford. He's the one that I think
Yeah.
recommended me to you. So we're working this out. We hope to bring something out a little bit more public, a little more operationalized, and less theoretical very soon. But it's exciting. I think it's a new take on something that's very old. Not only is it defense in depth and cybersecurity that we've done for decades, but it's also the human relational psychology element that has been ingrained in all of us, and we know how that works, and we can relate to that process. And I think when we're relating to AI, it feels a little more comfortable to say, I've been through this as a parent, as a child, as a neighbor, as a friend. I've experienced how we can trust and repair trust, and all of those experiential facets can come to life, I think, in AI.
I think so too. RSA committee, if you're looking for a speaker, I mean, this would be a really interesting topic. So I thank you, Elliot. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
taking
much.
time. Y'all, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.